The Second Vatican Council, which took place between 1962 and 1965, officially marked the beginning of an era in which the Catholic Church underwent a transformation from its long-established clerical authoritarian rule and religious intolerance into a renewed ecumenically unitive, liberally modernist institution. This meant that within the Catholic Church, a surge in feminism, social justice initiatives, and the notorious Marxist liberation theology movement were seen as being in accordance with consular teachings. As was only inevitable, deliberations at the Council triggered strong conflict between its conservative and liberal members, but in the end, it was the Joachimite faction, led chiefly by the Jesuits, which cleaned house. The immediate outcome is as follows, quote, 16 documents were eventually produced, 5 of which are particularly important. The Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, gave a deep theological analysis of the nature of the Church and defined the authority of the bishops in the position of the laity. The Constitution on Revelation, Die Verbum, outlined the nature of revelation, scripture, and tradition. It laid down canons for biblical interpretation and encouraged greater use of the Bible in theology, liturgy, and private devotion. The Pastoral Constitution of the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, dealt with the Church's attitude to human life and culture and to marriage, economic development, war, and other contemporary issues. The Constitution on the Liturgy set out a theology of the liturgy and principles for reform, e.g. through wider use of the vernacular, see liturgical movement. The Decree on Ecumenism explained the Roman Catholic Church's attitude to other Christians and outlined a program for reunion, unquote. As we will see, the Jesuits were behind all of these important constitutions and declarations of the Council, and ultimately the reshaping of the Church as a whole. Raymond A. Schroth writes in The American Jesuits, A History on page 224, quote, the year after Cizik returned to America, Father General Janssens, who had been sick and not actively directing the society for some time, died. But it was clear that, since so many leading Jesuits were periti, expert advisors who accompanied the delegates, the general congregation to elect his successor could not meet until the Vatican II Council had completed its work. By the time it closed in December 1965, its 3,000 participants, including 480 periti from all over the world, plus 80 non-Catholic observers, had considered 9,300 proposals to its various commissions and produced 70 documents, reduced to 20 texts, sent to the Pope for approval. At the end, there were 16 documents. Those which most involved the Jesuits were the Dogmatic Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, On Divine Revelation, Die Verbum, On the Sacred Liturgy, Sacrosanctum Concilium, On the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, and the Declaration on Religious Freedom, Dignitatis Humanae. Among the new ideas, rather reformulations of old truths, were the realization that the Church is not just the hierarchy, clergy, and religious, but the whole people of God. The Church's mission is not just the celebration of the sacraments, but the struggle for peace and justice in the world. The Church includes all Christians, not just Catholics, and all religions can be a means of salvation. And the dignity of the human person is the foundation of religious liberty for all. The implications of these ideas, once unleashed, were monumental, unquote. Indeed, the ushering in of these ideas was monumental, for they represented a formal reframing of the doctrine of the Catholic Church in a Joachitic context with an anti-authoritarian view of the church hierarchy, social justice, egalitarianism, and religious pluralism. In fact, Jesuit priest John J. McNeill authored an article in Cross Currents Journal, Volume 50, Number 1 out of 2, in the year 2000, pages 163 to 168, called The Church in the Age of the Holy Spirit, where he argues that the Church has entered into Joachim's third age. Remember, the Jesuits see themselves as the fulfillers of Joachim's prophecy, as that class of monks who would guide the Church into its new age. Vatican II was the means through which they laid the groundwork for achieving this objective. Continuing on in the examination of Jesuit influence on the Council, the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity was established by Pope John XXIII in 1960 as one of the preparatory commissions for the Second Vatican Council. Jesuit Cardinal Augustin Bia was appointed as its president. Bia's Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity prepared and presented a number of documents to the Council, including Ecumenism, Unitatis Redintegratio, Non-Christian Religions, Nostra Aetate, Religious Liberty, Dignitatis Humanae, with the Doctoral Commission, the Dogmatic Constitution on Divine Revelation, Dei Verbum. Moreover, the New York Times reported on the major role the Jesuits took in the conception and undertaking of the Second Vatican Council. Quote, "It was the Second Vatican Council, 1962-65, that unleashed liberal forces among the Jesuits, as it did in other church groups and among Roman Catholics in general. Many Jesuits were deeply involved in the preparations for the Council from the moment it was conceived by Pope John XXIII, who relied heavily on the Order for Council. The Jesuits' advanced scholarship was called on often before and during the Council. Pope John XXIII was particularly impressed by Augustin Bie, the brilliant German Jesuit who championed Christian-Jewish dialogue. He made him a cardinal in charge of the crucial Secretariat for the Promotion of Christian Unity, which became a rallying point for liberals and ecumenicists at the Council. Throughout Vatican II, such prominent Jesuits as John Courtney Murray, Henry de Lubac, and Gustave Weigel served as advisors and had much influence as liberal lobbyists. One of the after-effects of the Council was the encouragement of experimentation with new forms of liturgy, in which the Jesuits played a large role. The intellectual ferment that came into the open at Vatican II has continued longer within the order than in other church structures. Jesuits, especially in the United States and the Netherlands, have caused dismay in the Vatican by questioning papal pronouncements on birth control, priestly celibacy, the barring of women from the priesthood, and other issues. Other church worries stem from the sympathies of some Jesuits for guerrilla tactics in left-wing and pacifist causes. Jesuits are reportedly active in revolutionary movements in Guatemala and El Salvador. In Nicaragua, they played a role in the Sandinista Revolution. In the Philippines, the Reverend José Blanco recently was accused of plotting to destabilize the regime of President Ferdinand E. Marcos." Unquote. When considering the modern attempt by the Jesuits at realizing Joachim's Age of the Spirit, the prominence of French Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin cannot be understated. Although having died several years before the Second Vatican Council, Teilhard's evolutionary technological view of Christianity was a backdrop upon which the Council's documents were formulated. Joseph Ratzinger, also known as Pope Benedict XVI, admits in his book Les Principes de la Théologie Catholique that the Vatican II Constitution Gaudium et Spes derived its notion of Christianity from Teilhard de Chardin. Quote, "In Catholic milieus, the Second Vatican Council encouraged the accord with that general tendency, optimism towards the world. Prior to it, the awakening of theology and an entire new understanding of scriptures, the fathers, liturgy, and an openness in relations among divided Christians had raised a new enthusiasm for science. It had even set back the traditional pragmatism of a great part of theology students. Such theological knowledge appeared to them as a promise of new possibilities for the faith, new roads for the Church. The signal sent by Teilhard went further. In a bold vision, he included the historical movement of Christianity within the cosmic process of evolution from Alpha to Omega. This process was conceived as the New Genesis, that is to say, the development of consciousness in the evolution of man, to form a new sphere above the biosphere. This means that evolution is henceforth understood as a type of technical and scientific development in which matter and spirit, the individual and the society, constitute a global ensemble, a divine world. The consular constitution on the Church in the modern world, Gaudium et Spes, followed the same train of thinking. The Teilhardian maxim, Christianity means more progress, more of the technical, was what encouraged the consular fathers from both wealthy and poor countries to feel a more facile and concrete hope to translate and spread the notion rather than the complicated discussions about collegiality of bishops, primacy of the pope, scriptures and tradition, priests and laypeople, unquote. According to the Tradition in Action website, by the time of the council, several prelates made interventions declaring the formerly condemned Teilhard de Chardin was the intellectual father of Vatican II. The Politics of Heresy, the Modernist Crisis in Roman Catholicism by Lester R. Kurtz states on page 182, quote, Teilhard de Chardin, Jesuit, may be the one demonstrably explicit link between the modernists and developments at Vatican II, in that he was a close colleague and friend of Edouard Leroy, unquote. The British Teilhard Association admits that Jesuit Teilhard de Chardin, S.J., quote, anticipated the council by more than 10 years. In evolutionary terms, says Louis Armand, the initiatives of the Jesuit paleontologist and Pope John XXIII belong to the same wave. Émile Ridieu, S.J., believes he contributed to its new approach, and Henry de Lubac suggests there is a remarkable convergence between his thought and the thinking that predominated at the council. René de Once, S.J., is convinced the words of John XXIII and the texts of many of the consular documents contain clear Teilhardian overtones. Robert Farsi, S.J., argues Gaudium et Spes is clearly grounded in the fundamental orientations and basic concepts of Teilhard's thought, and depends in many ways on Teilhard's Christology. His theology, says Farsi, is clearly the most important influence, even a dominating one, on the document. And the introduction reads as though it had been dictated by Teilhard himself, unquote. Another leading advisor at the Vatican II Council was John Courtney Murray, S.J. Recall from a previous video that Murray had revised Robert Bellarmine's theory of indirect power in an effort to make Catholic action more palatable to non-Catholics within America in the years before Vatican II. Murray then advocated full-blown religious pluralism akin to American religious freedom, which would be incorporated into various Vatican II documents, in particular Dignitatis Humanae. It was through these deceptions, in the larger context of Vatican II, that the temporal power of the papacy was made to be forgotten in the minds of the masses in the following decades. No more was the Catholic Church to be seen as a power-hungry, dominionist organization seeking to subjugate the world to the Catholic religion and its priests, but now it was to become a progressive, modernist, and altruistic spiritual world family working for the so-called benefit of humanity, in reality intending the furtherance of the Joachimite agenda. Sally Vance Trembath, Ph.D., a professor at Santa Clara University's Department of Religious Studies, remarked how, quote, another tactical Jesuit genius at the council was John Courtney Murray, S.J. If B's influence was essential for propelling the council to the theological cruising altitude where its progressive trajectory was not as vulnerable to the small but bureaucratically powerful regressive faction, Murray's leadership helped the council navigate the very challenging final sessions of the council where the great pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world was threatened until the very end, unquote. Jocelyn Ogden of the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University writes of Murray's influence specifically in drafting Dignitatis Humanae and of being a principal overseer at Vatican II. Quote, by 1963, however, Murray was asked to attend the second session of the Second Vatican Council. Murray served as a peritus, or expert, on religious freedom and was largely responsible for influencing and drafting one of the most important documents emerging from the Council, Dignitatis Humanae, Declaration on Religious Freedom, unquote. As was noted earlier, another extremely important Jesuit leader at the Vatican II Council was Cardinal Augustin Bia, who was president of the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity, which prepared and presented the most important documents of the Council. Trembath writes in the same article, quote, the Bannon events put me in mind of several influential Jesuits who exercised such a leadership at Vatican II. One could argue, in fact, that without Cardinal Augustin Bea, S.J.'s leadership, the council might not have made it to a second session. It is not speculative to say that without Cardinal Bea's shrewd leadership, Pope John XXIII's intention to heal the tragic relationship between the Catholic and the Jewish communities would not have flowered in the transformative way that it did." Unquote. It was Jesuit Augustin Bea who oversaw the drafting of the Nostra Aetate Declaration, which first draft was commissioned by Pope John XXIII. Quote, "Bea was highly influential at the Vatican II Council in the 1960s as a decisive force in the drafting of Nostra Aetate, which repudiated anti-Semitism. In 1963, he held secret talks with Abraham Joshua Heschel, promoting Catholic-Jewish dialogue. John Borelli, a Vatican II historian, has observed that it took the will of John XXIII and the perseverance of Cardinal Bea to impose the declaration on the council." Unquote. It's been covered on this channel how the Anti-Defamation League gives out an interfaith award named after this Jesuit mastermind of Vatican II for his work in lessening Catholic anti-Semitism and in the process quelling historic suspicion and bitterness of the international Jewish community towards the Church. Major Jewish organizations including the ADL, World Jewish Congress, and B'nai B'rith are members of the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations, or IJCIC. The IJCIC is the official World Jewish Dialogue partner with the Vatican. Rabbi Daniel Polish, who is the chair of the IJCIC, was a contributor to Jesuit America magazine and was invited to Fordham University on many occasions. You can see Polish even delivered the John Courtney Murray S.J. lecture. The Dominican orders Marie Chenu and Marie Rosare Ganibe were additional influential contributors to Vatican II documents Gaudium et Spes and Lumen Gentium, respectively. Although the Dominicans' political influence within the Church is dwarfed by the Jesuits, the two are in alignment on social doctrine, with the Dominican order sharing a Joachimite heritage in common with the Jesuits. If 1814 was when the Jesuits took the reins of the Catholic Church, the 1960s Vatican II Council signified the order's death blow to the traditional ecclesiastic faction, which has been bleeding out ever since and is now taking its final breaths. The Jesuits installed Jorge Bergoglio S.J. as White Pope, and he's even been able to meddle in the affairs of the Knights of Malta, forcing the resignation of its former Grand Master, Matthew Festing. Although the ostensible cause for Festing's resignation was cited to have been a conflict over distributing birth control contraceptives, Tatler magazine notes, quote, "In Rome, there has been a flurry of debate about whether the real cause of difficulty is that Pope Francis views the Knights as backward-looking, over-traditionalist, and unwilling to embrace reform. Festing himself has been cast as a conservative acting in league with Cardinal Raymond Burke, a noted American arch-conservative who has accused Francis of being too liberal. Austin Ivra, the Pope's biographer, told The Guardian that behind this dispute is an internal struggle within the Knights between reformers who want the order to focus on humanitarian work and a traditionalist clique out of step with Francis. Historically, the Knights have mixed ecclesiastical policy and high finance in a way which is repugnant to Francis. He is naturally inclined to support the reformers and seized the opportunity to encourage them." Unquote.